Well, the Ukrainian World Congress was organized under the name World Congress of Free Ukrainians in 1967. It didn't just come about. It took a long time to happen. In fact, the initial idea came from Simon Petlura in the 1920s. And so, frankly speaking, it took us over 50 years to organize the World Congress of Free Ukrainians. And in fact, as early as 1960, a committee was organized. So in order to simply convene the Congress. So it took that committee 7 years. They had a specific purpose, and it took them 7 years. So everything that we Ukrainians do, we do with tremendous effort, because nothing comes easy to us. There is some truth to the saying that where there are two Ukrainians, there are three hetmans, okay? But the fact of the matter is that in 1967, we formed the World Congress of Free Ukrainians, and we knew that by our nature, we were very individualistic, which means that we were prone to anarchy and chaos, okay, which is a good thing sometimes, okay? So we decided that it's imperative that we insert into our bylaws a provision, paragraph 23, that said that every decision at the World Congress has to be reached by unanimity, so that there is no victor and no loser, okay? Because what would have happened? The victors would have carried on, the losers would have walked out, and we would never have endured for 50 years, okay? But given the fact that we now exist for 50 years, we've become much more amenable to listening to the opinions of others and then trying to reach a consensus. The fact of the matter is, this is only a beginning. 50 years is nothing in history, and given the geographic dynamics by which we live and exist, given the fact that Russia is our neighbor and probably will continue to be our neighbor, the Ukrainian World Congress as a political body, because it's not strictly a unification of Ukrainians residing outside of Ukraine. It's a union of Ukrainians with a very determined purpose, and the purpose is political. The purpose is humanitarian in the sense that we exist in order to help Ukrainians, but not only help them in a humanitarian manner, meaning with food, money, and services, but to help them politically. For example, if Ukrainians are discriminated against in certain countries, all right, the other Ukrainians in the countries that have the political wherewithal to influence, all right, their countries need to step up and do something about it. And secondly, we need to assist Ukraine in its defense. And this defense, unfortunately, will continue. This war, people ask me often, when will this war in Donbass and Crimea end? The answer is it will never end, all right? The hybrid war will continue. It will continue for the ensuing centuries, and we need to be prepared for this. This year, we marked the 50th anniversary, and that was very important. The observances were very largely celebratory, which was very good, but at the same time, something was missing, and we should have included more analysis into the celebrations. Meaning when we had a meeting with the president, when we had a meeting with the foreign ministry, we should not have simply congratulated them on a job well done, but we should have pointed out the deficiencies in the job that had not been done. And plenty had not been done. Ukraine, the sole problem, or Ukraine has more than one problem today. The war is not the only problem. Russia is not the only problem. There is another problem. It's called corruption. Corruption is an equally significant problem in Ukraine. As long as people, the oligarchs, are getting richer while there is no middle class and the average Ukrainian is getting poorer, all right, Ukraine will not be the Ukraine that we envisioned, nor will it be the Ukraine that should exist. Because there is no need for a Ukraine for the oligarchs. There is a need for a Ukraine to be the homeland or the mother spiritually for all Ukrainians and all people who reside on that territory, including non-Ukrainians. All right? But it has to afford them the opportunity to lead a normal life. If 1% or less than 1% of the population is getting richer, not because of hard work, but because of no rule of law, the lack of transparency, a certain amount of Wild West, if you understand from the American perspective, mentality, meaning that you have to defend what you own, all right, there will be no future, all right, for Ukraine. And these are issues that need to be brought to the attention of the foreign ministry, the president, and so forth, and so on. And that was somewhat of a deficit in terms of our observances, because it didn't raise that issue often enough. My sense was that they're becoming much more politically sophisticated, but they're not working. They're not working for the benefit of the Ukrainian people, but they are getting more politically sophisticated. So on more and more occasions, they know what to say. But they don't want us to go home. They want us to help. But they want us to help Ukraine the way they see Ukraine, this current Ukraine, which is a better Ukraine than it was 20 years ago. All right? But still, it's hardly the Ukraine that our forefathers fought for. Certainly not the Ukraine that the first revolution in 1990, the revolution on the cement, the students' revolution, or the Orange Revolution of 2004, or the Revolution of Dignity of 2013 or 14, aimed at. What those revolutions looked forward to was a Ukraine where the average person living in Ukraine could live as a normal human being, all right? Meaning that he would have the financial capability. He would have the opportunities, material opportunities to set up a life for himself, his family, his grandchildren, and future generations. And that, unfortunately, is not the case because the levers of power are in the hands of very few people, as is the wealth of the country. And the privatization is unfortunately not transparent. It seems that the oligarchs are dividing the wealth simply amongst themselves, and it's not being shared with the people, or the people are not being given the opportunities. Granted, a lot of the wealth is already in the hands of very few, all right? But I asked the president, when are you going to begin the process, all right, of punishing those who acquired wealth illegally, which includes, I would say, 99% of the oligarchs. 99%. I'll give you a case. I'll give you an example. Akhmetov, in 2010, under Yanukovych, he purchases the rights to the main department store in Kyiv, the Tsum, Centralny Univermag. He spends tremendous money, all right, to renovate it. It looks like it's a gem. But you and I, living in Canada and the United States, would be hard-pressed to pay for most of the objects. A television, a circular television, granted 52 inches, costs $6,000 in Tsum. It's a money laundering scheme for Akhmetov. My daughter and I, when we went there, there were two other customers in the premises. Everybody else was service. Subsequently, some very wealthy people walked in, all right? But this doesn't serve Ukraine's purposes. And this property was acquired in 2010. How it was acquired? By what mechanism? No one is suing Akhmetov. There is no criminal prosecution against Akhmetov or anyone who enabled him. And most of the people, when I raised this issue in Ukraine, Most of my friends tell you, Askold, please drop this because Akhmetov has plenty of people who are going to take care of you. All right? But the fact of the matter, if people continue to be afraid, okay, and a lot of people are afraid, and that's one of the reasons, but the purpose of government and the purpose of a sluzba bezpeki and the purpose of a police is to make sure that people are not afraid, that people are, that it's available to them to criticize and to make reforms without being afraid. And unfortunately, that's not the case today in Ukraine. So the bottom line is, in the future, the Ukrainian World Congress has to be not an arm of the Ukrainian government. We're not a ministry of the Ukrainian government. We are an NGO. We have to be the conscience of the Ukrainian people, meaning that we have to raise issues that are important for the average Ukrainian, all right, and not simply talk about the one item that is overwhelming today, which is the war. The war is very important. The war has to end, but it's never going to end permanently. In other words, it's going to change its format, okay? But at the same time, life must go on, and the struggle with corruption and against the oligarchs has to continue. Many people were under the impression that once Poroshenko came to power, he had so much wealth that he wouldn't need anymore. But the fact of the matter is that human nature has proven all of us wrong, and the wealth, those who are wealthy simply wish to acquire more wealth. But more important than non-oligarch, I would like to see, it's like the search for the honest man, you know, searching for a person who genuinely loves the people of Ukraine, who genuinely wants to do good for the people of Ukraine. I don't believe, all right, for example, I believe that Yushchenko was a person who was genuinely interested in doing good for Ukrainians, but Yushchenko wasn't equipped to do it because he was not an administrator, okay? He had a brother who was as corrupt as any of the other oligarchs, and he got entangled in this as well. And look at the panoply of presidents that we've had in Ukraine. Kravchuk, an ideologue of the Communist Party. Kuchma, well, if Kuchma did everything right and simply had that wife who refused to speak Ukrainian, even though she was the first lady of Ukraine, he couldn't do much good for Ukraine. And then came Yushchenko, who was seemingly an individual who was for the average Ukrainian, but had an oligarch brother, all right, and simply administratively was not equipped to handle the problems that Ukraine faced. And then you had a true renegade in Yanukovych, and now you have a person, Poroshenko. He's a nice guy. He's very savvy, but he's been everywhere. He was with Medvedchuk. He's been with some of the lowest segments of the Ukrainian oligarchic community. He's been connected with them. And today, to some degree, he's sharing. In other words, he's telling the other oligarchs, well, I'll take this, you take that part of Ukraine's wealth, and it's kind of an agreement among evil people to rob Ukraine.